Before the story begins, imagine this for 1 second. A young black doctor, overlooked, doubted, and nearly fired, walks into a silent hospital room to change a routine bandage. And what happens next will expose hidden crimes, stolen fortunes, buried identities, and a truth so powerful it will change lives forever. So if you're in the USA and you love stories where justice hits hard, destiny strikes unexpectedly, and the impossible becomes real, make sure you hit subscribe right now because stories like this don't just entertain. They wake something up inside you. And now the story begins. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old money, the kind of room reserved for donors whose names were etched onto wings and plaques, and Dr. Elijah Moore stood quietly beside the bed of Margaret Whitmore, the millionaire philanthropist who had been in a coma for 11 months, her silver hair neatly brushed every morning by private nurses who whispered about her fortune, her will, and the powerful people circling like vultures, and Elijah, young, black, exhausted, and still, carrying the weight of being constantly questioned in a system that treated him like a guest instead of a physician, had been assigned the most boring task of the night shift: change a bandage on her forearm where an IV-related wound refused to heal, a task beneath his training, but not beneath his humility. And as he gently unwrapped the gauze, he noticed something no one else had noticed before: a faint scar beneath the bruising shaped like a crescent moon intersected by a straight line, a symbol his grandmother once warned him never to forget, a mark used decades ago by a secretive adoption network that trafficked children of color into wealthy families under the guise of philanthropic rescue. And his hands froze for a moment, because his grandmother had been a nurse too, fired in the 1980s for asking too many questions, and she had whispered that mark to him the night before she died, telling him if he ever saw it again, it meant someone powerful had stolen a life. And as Elijah leaned closer to rewrap the bandage, Margaret's fingers twitched, just slightly, enough to make him step back and check the monitors. And then it happened. Her eyelids fluttered like they were fighting gravity itself, and in a hoarse whisper that barely escaped her throat, she said a single word: Elijah, even though no one had spoken his name. And alarms didn't go off because her vitals barely changed, but Elijah's entire world did, because she wasn't supposed to wake up. Not now, not ever, according to the neurologists. And when she opened her eyes fully, cloudy but focused, she locked onto him with fear and recognition and whispered, "They lied. You're the only one I can trust." And before he could call for help, she gripped his wrist with surprising strength and slid something into his palm, a tiny flash drive warm from her skin. And then her eyes rolled back, and she slipped once more into unconsciousness just as footsteps approached, and Elijah hid the drive instinctively, his pulse racing, because he knew in that instant that he had crossed an invisible line. And when the head nurse arrived, she glanced at him suspiciously, asking why he looked shaken, and he lied smoothly, something he hated doing, saying the bandage had bled more than expected. But from that night forward, Elijah noticed subtle changes: security guards lingering too long, administrators suddenly questioning his credentials again. His schedule shifted erratically, and when he finally watched the contents of the flash drive at home, he realized why. Because it contained video logs recorded by Margaret before her coma detailing how she had discovered that her closely. Before this story even begins, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear is the kind of true-to-life, heart-stopping story America can't stop watching, the kind that reminds us talent can't be mocked, destiny can't be hidden, and greatness always finds its voice. And if you believe in underdogs, second chances, and moments that change lives forever, you don't want to miss a single story like this. Now, here's the story of the black son of a famous singer who was asked to sing at school as a joke, only to leave everyone speechless. A story that began on a gray Monday morning in a public high school where laughter echoed louder than hope, where 17-year-old Elijah Carter sat in the back row with his hood pulled low, trying to disappear as whispers followed him like shadows, because everyone knew his last name. Even though most didn't know the truth, they only knew rumors: that his father was a legendary singer who once filled stadiums, that his mother vanished when he was young, that he lived with his grandmother in a small apartment far from the spotlight. And because of that famous bloodline, people assumed Elijah must be arrogant or privileged, when in reality he was quiet, withdrawn, and terrified of one thing: singing in front of others. Because music wasn't just sound to him, it was memory. It was pain. It was the echo of a father who left to chase fame and never came back. And at school, Elijah was an easy target, especially for a group of students who thought talent was something you could buy or mock. led by a loud, confident boy named Trevor, who loved attention and hated anyone mysterious. And that day in music class, when the teacher announced a voluntary performance assignment, Trevor smirked and loudly said, "Why don't we hear from Elijah? Isn't his dad some big singer?" And the room erupted in laughter, desks shaking with amusement as heads turned toward Elijah, whose heart began to pound so hard he thought everyone could hear it. And the teacher hesitated, unsure whether to shut it down or let it play out. And in that hesitation, the joke became real. And Elijah slowly stood up, hands trembling, feeling every eye on his skin, every whisper slicing into him. And he wanted to refuse. He wanted to sit back down. But something inside him, something buried deep, something inherited and yet painfully earned, told him that running would only make the laughter louder. And as he walked to the front of the room, the snickers grew. Phones subtly raised to record what everyone expected to be a disaster, and Trevor leaned back with a grin, already enjoying the humiliation he believed was coming. But what no one knew was that Elijah had been singing his whole life, just not for crowds, not for praise, but for survival, singing quietly in his room at night to drown out memories of eviction notices, of his grandmother crying over unpaid bills, of old records spinning with his father's voice echoing through cracked speakers, teaching Elijah without ever being there. And as Elijah stood before the class, the teacher asked what song he wanted to sing. And Elijah paused, then said softly, "I'll sing something original," which caused another wave of laughter because who did this quiet kid think he was? And the teacher sighed, but nodded, and the room fell into an uneasy silence as Elijah closed his eyes, took a breath that felt like it came from his soul, and then he sang. And in the first note, something changed, because his voice wasn't shaky or weak. It was rich, deep, and haunting, a voice that carried pain and hope in the same breath, a voice that seemed far too big for a classroom, and the laughter died instantly. Phones froze midair, and Trevor's grin slowly faded as Elijah's voice filled every corner of